Imagine walking into a bank where you've been a customer for over 15 years. You're wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, carrying a worn leather briefcase that's seen better days. To most people, you look like any other working-class person trying to make ends meet. But what they don't know is that the account you're trying to access holds more money than most people will see in several lifetimes. What happens when the color of your skin matters more than the color of your money? What occurs when years of hard work, success, and achievement can be dismissed in a single glance? And, most importantly, what unfolds when someone finally decides they've had enough of a system that judges worth by appearance rather than character? This is the story of Marcus Thompson, a self-made billionaire whose simple visit to deposit a check would expose the ugly truth hiding behind polished marble counters and professional smiles. It's a story about power, prejudice, and the moment when one man's patience finally ran out. What happened next didn't just shake a bank branch. It sent ripples through an entire industry and reminded everyone watching that justice, when it finally arrives, can be swift and absolute. Some moments change everything. This was one of them. Marcus Thompson adjusted the strap of his weathered leather briefcase as he walked through the financial district of downtown Chicago. The October morning was crisp, and the bustling streets were filled with men and women in expensive suits hurrying to their high-rise offices. Marcus, however, stood out for all the wrong reasons in his faded blue jeans, gray hoodie, and worn sneakers that had seen better days. At 45 years old, Marcus had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. The man walking past million-dollar condominiums and luxury boutiques was worth more than most of the people rushing around him combined. His net worth of $2.3 billion had been built from absolutely nothing. A journey that started in the housing projects of South Chicago, where gunshots were more common than birthday parties. 25 years earlier, Marcus had been a 19-year-old kid with nothing but a high school diploma and a dream of creating something bigger than himself. While his friends were either heading to college on scholarships or getting caught up in street life, Marcus had scraped together $300 and started a small computer repair business out of his grandmother's basement. He had always been good with technology, spending countless hours at the local library learning about computers when other kids his age were playing video games or hanging out on street corners. The early days were brutal. Marcus would wake up at 5 in the morning to hand out flyers advertising his services, then spend the rest of the day fixing computers for anyone willing to pay him $20 an hour. He reinvested every penny back into the business, buying better tools, and eventually renting a tiny storefront in a neighborhood that most people avoided after dark. His mother worried constantly, begging him to get a steady job at the factory where she worked. But Marcus had a vision that extended far beyond the limitations others placed on him. By age 25, his small repair shop had evolved into a technology consulting firm. Marcus had taught himself programming languages, web development, and database management through online courses and library books. He began helping local businesses set up their first websites and computer networks. His reputation for honest work and fair prices spread quickly through word of mouth, and soon he was getting calls from companies across the city. The real breakthrough came when Marcus was 30. He had developed a software solution that helped small businesses manage their inventory more efficiently. Instead of keeping it to himself, he decided to license the software to other companies. Within 2 years, his little program was being used by thousands of businesses across the Midwest. The licensing fees alone were bringing in more money than he had ever imagined possible. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with regional success. He used the profits from his software to invest in other technology startups, carefully researching each opportunity and only backing companies whose founders reminded him of his younger self. Hungry, hardworking people who others might overlook because of their backgrounds or appearance. His investment strategy was unconventional, but incredibly successful. While venture capital firms were throwing money at flashy presentations and Ivy League graduates, Marcus was finding diamonds in the rough. One of his most successful investments was in a mobile app created by 2 college dropouts from Detroit. The app helped people find affordable housing in their area, and Marcus saw its potential immediately. When the company went public 5 years later, his initial $50,000 investment was worth $47 million. Similar success stories followed. each one adding zeros to his net worth, while simultaneously proving that success could come from anywhere if someone was willing to bet on talent over pedigree. Despite his massive wealth, Marcus had never forgotten where he came from. He still lived in the same middle-class neighborhood where he had bought his first house, though he had quietly purchased several properties on his block to ensure his elderly neighbors wouldn't be displaced by gentrification. His car was a 3-year-old Honda Civic that he drove himself, and his daily uniform remained simple clothes that could be found at any department store. He ate lunch at the same diner he had been going to for 15 years, where the owner still called him baby, and the waitresses knew his order by heart. The money hadn't changed Marcus's core values, but it had given him something more powerful than luxury cars or expensive watches. It had given him the freedom to help others and the resources to fight injustice when he encountered it. He had quietly funded scholarships for dozens of kids from his old neighborhood, helped struggling families pay their rent, and even bought and forgave medical debt for people he would never meet. His philanthropic work was done anonymously because Marcus had learned that the moment people knew about his wealth, they treated him differently. On this particular morning, Marcus was heading to First National Bank to deposit a check from one of his investment exits. The amount was substantial, $847 million from the sale of his stake in a renewable energy company. But, for Marcus, it was just another business transaction. He had been banking at First National for over 15 years, ever since his computer repair business started generating enough income to require a business account. The branch on LaSalle Street was convenient to his office, and he had always appreciated their straightforward approach to banking. As he approached the imposing glass and steel building that housed the bank, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since those early days of eating ramen noodles for dinner and sleeping on his grandmother's couch. Yet in many ways, he was still the same person, someone who believed that hard work and integrity mattered more than background or appearance. He was about to discover just how naive that belief could be. The bank's lobby was impressive, with marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers and mahogany furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Marcus had been in this lobby hundreds of times over the years, conducting various transactions and building what he thought was a solid relationship with the institution. He knew several of the tellers by name, and they always greeted him warmly when he came in. But today felt different from the moment he walked through the heavy glass doors. The usual friendly atmosphere seemed cold, and Marcus noticed several employees glancing in his direction with expressions he couldn't quite read. He attributed it to his casual appearance. Perhaps they were wondering why someone dressed like a maintenance worker was in their upscale financial institution. If only they knew that the man in the hoodie and jeans had more money in their bank than most of their corporate clients. Marcus approached the information desk where a young woman in a crisp business suit looked up from her computer screen. Her smile, which had been genuine when greeting the previous customer, a well-dressed white man in an expensive suit, seemed forced when she turned her attention to Marcus. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone professional, but notably cooler than the warm greeting she had given the man before him. "I need to make a deposit," Marcus replied, patting his briefcase. "It's a fairly large amount, so I'll probably need to speak with someone in customer service." The woman's eyes flicked up and down, taking in his appearance once more. "Do you have an account with us?" "Yes, I've been banking here for over 15 years, Marcus answered, starting to feel a familiar tension in his stomach. He had experienced this kind of scrutiny countless times throughout his life, the assumption that he didn't belong, that he couldn't possibly have legitimate business in certain places. "I'll need to see 2 forms of ID, she said, which Marcus found odd since he had never been asked for more than one piece of identification for a routine deposit. He pulled out his driver's license and passport, handing them to her with patience that had been hard-earned through years of similar interactions. She examined both documents carefully, comparing the photos to his face multiple times as if checking for forgeries. "Sir, what type of deposit are you making?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper as if she were discussing something inappropriate. "It's a business transaction," Marcus replied calmly. "A check from the sale of some investments." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly, and Marcus could see the wheels turning in her head. She was clearly trying to reconcile his appearance with the notion that he might have investments worth depositing. After a few more seconds of internal debate, she picked up her phone made a quiet call to someone, speaking in hushed tones while stealing glances at Marcus. "Someone will be with you shortly," she finally said, gesturing toward the waiting area. "Please have a seat." Marcus thanked her and walked over to the leather chairs near the window, his briefcase in hand. As he waited, he watched the flow of customers being helped by various tellers and customer service representatives. He noticed that other customers, all of whom appeared to be white and well-dressed, were being served immediately without the same level of scrutiny he had received. A pattern was emerging, and it was one that Marcus had hoped he wouldn't encounter in a place where he had been a loyal customer for so many years. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Marcus checked his watch and realized he had been waiting longer than it typically took for him to complete his entire banking transaction. Other customers who had arrived after him were being helped promptly, their business conducted efficiently, and with genuine smiles from the bank staff. Finally, a middle-aged man in a navy suit approached him. "Mr. Thompson? I'm David Harrison, the branch manager. I understand you'd like to make a deposit." Marcus stood and extended his hand for a handshake, which Harrison accepted with obvious reluctance. "Yes, I have a check I need to deposit into my business account." "Right. Well, let's step into my office and discuss this," Harrison said, leading Marcus toward a glass-walled office at the back of the lobby. As they walked through the bank, Marcus felt the eyes of employees and customers following him. Some stares were curious, others were suspicious, and a few seemed openly hostile. He wondered what these people would think if they knew that the man they were looking at with such judgment had more money in their bank than some small countries had in their national treasuries. Harrison's office was well appointed with the same expensive furniture and artwork that decorated the rest of the bank. Behind his desk hung diplomas from prestigious universities and photos of him with various politicians and business leaders. Marcus took note of the fact that every person in those photographs was white, which told him something about the circles Harrison moved in outside of work. "So, Mr. Thompson," Harrison began, settling behind his desk without offering Marcus a seat, "I understand you want to make a deposit. Before we proceed, I need to ask you a few questions about the source of these funds." Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly, but he maintained his composure. In all his years of banking, he had never been questioned about the source of his deposits, especially not for routine business transactions. "It's a check from the sale of my stake in a company called Green Tech Innovations. They're a renewable energy firm that was recently acquired." Harrison pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes, as if he were conducting an interrogation rather than helping a long-time customer with a simple deposit. "And what was your role with this company?" "I was an early investor," Marcus replied, his patience beginning to wear thin. "I provided seed funding when they were just starting out." "I see," Harrison said, though his tone suggested he didn't see it all. "And this check, how much are we talking about?" Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out the check, sliding it across the desk. Harrison's eyes widened as he read the amount, and Marcus could see him counting the zeros to make sure he had read it correctly. $847 million, Harrison said slowly, as if saying the words would help him process them. "That's correct," Marcus confirmed. Marcus sat in silence for a moment, processing what David Harrison had just implied. The branch manager's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Marcus could feel his heart rate increasing as the full weight of the situation became clear. After 15 years of banking at this institution, after countless transactions, and a spotless financial record, he was being treated like a criminal simply because a middle-aged white man couldn't believe that a black man in casual clothes could legitimately possess such wealth. "Let me make sure I understand you correctly," Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. "You're suggesting that my money might be the proceeds of criminal activity?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly realizing that he had ventured into dangerous territory. "I'm not suggesting anything, Mr. Thompson. It's just that we have procedures we must follow, especially for unusually large deposits from certain demographics." The phrase "certain demographics" confirmed what Marcus already knew. This had nothing to do with bank policy and everything to do with racial profiling. He had experienced subtle forms of discrimination throughout his life, but never so blatantly, and never in a place where he had been a loyal customer for over a decade. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus said, pulling out his phone, I'm going to call my attorney and have him conference in with Green Tech's legal department to verify this transaction. Will that satisfy your concerns about the legitimacy of this check?" Before Harrison could respond, Marcus had already dialed his lawyer's number. Within minutes, he had three-way calling established with both his personal attorney and the general counsel of Green Tech Innovations. Both lawyers confirmed the details of the transaction, provided documentation numbers, and offered to fax any additional paperwork Harrison might need. When the call ended, Harrison looked even more uncomfortable than before. The legal verification had eliminated any legitimate basis for his suspicions, yet he seemed reluctant to back down from his position. "Well," Harrison said, clearing his throat, "I appreciate the confirmation, but we'll still need to run our own independent verification of these funds. As I mentioned, this could take several weeks." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "Mr. Harrison, I've been banking here for 15 years. I've never had a single issue with any transaction, large or small. I've never bounced a check, never been late on a loan payment, and never given you any reason to question my integrity. So I have to ask, what exactly has changed today that would make you treat me differently than you've treated me for the past decade and a half?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, which it essentially was. Harrison fumbled for words, his face reddening as he realized there was no good answer that wouldn't expose his obvious bias. "It's nothing personal, Mr. Thompson. It's just that we have to be extra careful these days with large transactions. You understand?" "No, I don't understand," Marcus replied firmly. "Last month, I deposited a check for $32 million from another investment exit. You processed it immediately without question. 3 months before that, it was $18 million. What's different about today?" Harrison didn't have an answer because they both knew what was different. Today, Marcus had dressed casually instead of in the business suit he typically wore to the bank. Today, he looked like what many people's prejudices told them a poor black man should look like. And those assumptions were overriding 15 years of exemplary customer history. "Look," Harrison said, his tone becoming more dismissive, "I think it would be best if you considered banking somewhere else. Perhaps somewhere that's more suitable for your type of business." The words hit Marcus like a slap across the face. "Your type of business," another thinly veiled racist comment that suggested illegal activity simply because of his race. But it was the suggestion that he should bank elsewhere that truly infuriated him. Harrison was essentially telling a customer who had millions of dollars with the bank to take his business to a competitor. Marcus stood up slowly, his jaw clenched with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Harrison, I want to make sure I understand what just happened here. You've accused me of money laundering with no evidence. You've questioned the legitimacy of my funds despite legal verification. And now you're suggesting I take my business elsewhere. Is that correct?" "I'm simply trying to protect the bank's interests," Harrison said defensively. "Protect the bank from what exactly?" "From a customer who has never caused any problems and who keeps millions of dollars in deposits with you." Harrison's face was now bright red, and sweat was beginning to form on his forehead. "Mr. Thompson, I think this conversation has gone far enough. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. He was being kicked out of a bank where he had been a customer for 15 years, simply because a racist manager couldn't accept that he might legitimately possess substantial wealth. "Fine," Marcus said, his voice controlled but filled with steel. "I'll leave. But I want you to know that this isn't over." As Marcus walked toward the door of Harrison's office, he could hear the branch manager making a phone call behind him. When he reached the doorway, he turned back and saw Harrison speaking in hushed tones while watching him leave. "Yes, security? We have a situation in the lobby. There's a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was asking questions about depositing what he claims is a large check, but I think he might be planning something. Can you send someone down to escort him out and make sure he doesn't cause any trouble?" Marcus's blood ran cold as he heard those words. Harrison was calling security on him, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he was a black man who had dared to challenge the manager's racist treatment. Even worse, Harrison was lying about the nature of their interaction, making it sound like Marcus was a potential threat rather than a customer who had been insulted and discriminated against. Within seconds, 2 security guards appeared in the lobby. They were both large white men who looked more like bouncers than bank security, and they approached Marcus with their hands resting on their utility belts where Marcus could see they carried pepper spray and tasers. "Sir, we're going to need you to leave the premises immediately," one of the guards said in a loud voice that drew the attention of everyone in the lobby. "I'm a customer here," Marcus said calmly, though he could feel dozens of eyes watching the scene unfold. "I was simply trying to make a deposit." "Sir, step away from the counter and move toward the exit," the second guard ordered, moving to position himself between Marcus and the rest of the lobby. Marcus realized that arguing would only make the situation worse. The security guards had clearly been given a version of events that painted him as some kind of threat, and anything he said now would likely be twisted to justify their actions. He could see other customers watching the scene with expressions ranging from curiosity to fear to disgust. Some were pulling out their phones to record what was happening. "I'm leaving," Marcus said, raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "But I want everyone here to know that I've been a customer of this bank for 15 years, and I was just treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin." "Sir, keep moving," one of the guards said, placing his hand on Marcus's back to guide him toward the exit. As they escorted him through the lobby, Marcus could hear whispered conversations among the other customers. Some seemed to be expressing sympathy for his situation, while others appeared to be accepting the bank's version of events. He caught fragments of conversations as he passed. "That's terrible. I can't believe they're treating him like that." "Well, you never know these days. Banks have to be careful. Did you see how he was dressed? He probably doesn't even have an account here. I heard he was trying to deposit some kind of fake check." The rumors and assumptions were already starting, and Marcus knew that by the end of the day, the story would be completely distorted. He would be remembered not as a wronged customer, but as a suspicious person who had to be removed by security. When they reached the front doors, one of the security guards handed Marcus a piece of paper. "This is a trespassing notice. If you come back to this branch, you'll be arrested." Marcus looked at the paper in disbelief. He was being banned from a bank where he had been a customer for 15 years, where he had millions of dollars in deposits, and where he had never caused any problems. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. "This isn't legal," Marcus said. "You can't ban a customer without cause." "Sir, the branch manager has the authority to refuse service to anyone he deems disruptive or threatening. You need to leave now, or we'll call the police." Marcus realized there was no point in continuing the argument. He folded the trespassing notice and put it in his pocket, then walked out of the bank with as much dignity as he could muster. But as he stood on the sidewalk outside the building, looking up at the gleaming tower that housed an institution he had trusted for 15 years, he felt a mixture of rage and determination unlike anything he had ever experienced. He pulled out his phone and called his attorney again. "Michael, I need you to cancel everything on your schedule today. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." "What happened?" his lawyer asked, concern evident in his voice. "I was just kicked out of my bank by security because the branch manager accused me of money laundering and decided I was a threat. They've banned me from the premises and handed me a trespassing notice." Marcus Thompson's downtown office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Willis Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Chicago and Lake Michigan. The space reflected his personality, successful but understated, with modern furniture and state-of-the-art technology, but none of the ostentatious displays of wealth that characterized many billionaire offices. His assistant, Janet Rodriguez, had been with him for 8 years and was one of the few people who knew the full extent of his business empire. When Marcus arrived at his office 30 minutes after the bank incident, Janet immediately sensed something was wrong. She had never seen him look so angry, and the fact that he had called an emergency meeting with his attorney set off alarm bells in her mind. "Mr. Thompson, your lawyer is waiting in the conference room," she said as he walked past her desk. He seemed very concerned about whatever happened this morning. Marcus nodded and headed straight for the conference room, where Michael Chun, his attorney for the past 12 years, was already reviewing legal documents on his laptop. Michael was a brilliant lawyer who had helped Marcus navigate complex business deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But he had never seen his client look as furious as he did walking through the conference room door. "Marcus, what the hell happened at that bank?" Michael asked, closing his laptop and giving his full attention to his client. Marcus recounted the entire incident in detail, from the suspicious looks when he entered the bank to being escorted out by security guards while other customers watched. Michael took notes throughout the story, occasionally asking for clarification on specific statements made by the branch manager and security personnel. When Marcus finished his account, Michael sat back in his chair with a look of disbelief. They actually handed you a trespassing notice? For trying to deposit a legitimate check into your own account. It gets worse, Marcus said, pulling out his phone. I want to show you something. He opened his banking app and navigated to his account summary, then turned the phone toward Michael. The lawyer's eyes widened as he saw the numbers on the screen. You have over $400 million in various accounts with First National Bank, Michael said slowly. $437 million, to be exact, Marcus confirmed. Plus another $200 million in certificates of deposit and investment accounts managed by their wealth management division. I'm probably one of their top 50 individual clients, maybe top 25. Michael shook his head in amazement. So they just discriminated against and expelled a customer who has over $600 million with their bank. It appears so, Marcus said grimly. Michael began typing rapidly on his laptop, pulling up information about First National Bank's corporate structure, recent legal history, and regulatory oversight. What he found made the situation even more interesting. Marcus, this bank has been under scrutiny from federal regulators for the past 2 years. They've been fined twice for discriminatory lending practices, and they're currently under investigation by the Department of Justice for potential civil rights violations in their branch operations. Tell me more, Marcus said, leaning forward with interest. There have been 17 formal complaints filed against various First National branches in the past 18 months. The complaints allege racial discrimination in service delivery, loan approvals, and general customer treatment. The bank has settled most of these cases out of court with confidentiality agreements. But the pattern is clear. Marcus felt his anger growing even stronger. The incident that had just happened to him wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a systematic pattern of discrimination that the bank had been covering up through legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements. What are our options? Marcus asked. Michael continued typing as he spoke. We could file a civil rights lawsuit under federal anti-discrimination laws. Given your status as a customer and the clear evidence of discriminatory treatment, we'd have a very strong case. We could also file complaints with the Federal Reserve, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But, Marcus said, sensing there was more to consider. But, Michael continued, lawsuits take years. And even if we win, the bank will likely just pay a fine and promise to do better. The individual employees who discriminated against you might face some disciplinary action, but they'll probably keep their jobs. The real impact would be minimal. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where he had been humiliated just an hour earlier. The anger was still burning in his chest, but his mind was working on a different level, calculating possibilities and potential consequences. Michael, what would happen if I withdrew all of my money from First National today? From a legal perspective? Nothing. You have every right to close your accounts for any reason. But, Marcus, are you sure that's the best way to handle this? Marcus turned back toward his attorney. What if it wasn't just my money? What if other people withdrew their money too? Michael's eyes lit up as he began to understand where his client's mind was going. You're talking about organizing some kind of boycott? I'm talking about hitting them where it really hurts, Marcus said. Their bottom line. I want to know everything about this bank, who their major clients are, who sits on their board of directors, what their financial vulnerabilities are. I want to understand their business model well enough to disrupt it. Michael opened a new document on his laptop and began typing. That kind of research is going to take time and resources. Are you sure you want to go down this road? It could get very expensive and time-consuming. Marcus laughed for the first time since leaving the bank. Michael, expensive isn't a concern. I made more money this morning from my stock portfolio appreciation than most people make in a year. And time isn't an issue either. I've been looking for a meaningful way to use my wealth to fight injustice. This bank just gave me the perfect opportunity. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus and Michael developed a comprehensive strategy. First, They would hire a team of private investigators to research every aspect of First National Bank's operations, looking for patterns of discrimination, regulatory violations, and financial weaknesses. Second, they would reach out to civil rights organizations and community groups to document other instances of discrimination by the bank. Third, they would use Marcus's business connections to encourage other wealthy clients to consider moving their money to more ethical institutions. By the end of the afternoon, Marcus had authorized Michael to spend whatever was necessary to build an airtight case against the bank. They had hired the best private investigation firm in Chicago, retained a team of civil rights lawyers with extensive experience fighting financial discrimination, and begun reaching out to contacts in the media who might be interested in covering the story. The next morning, Marcus received a call that changed everything. Dr. Patricia Williams, a prominent civil rights lawyer and longtime friend, had heard about his situation through mutual contacts in the legal community. "Marcus, I've been dealing with cases like yours for 30 years, she said during their phone call. What happened to you yesterday wasn't just discrimination. It was a perfect example of how institutional racism operates in American banking. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I'm already putting together a legal team and conducting an investigation," Marcus replied. "But I have a feeling you're calling because you have something else in mind." Patricia laughed. "You know me too well. I represent a group of plaintiffs who have been discriminated against by First National Bank over the past few years. We've been building a class action lawsuit, but we've been struggling because the bank keeps settling individual cases before we can establish a clear pattern of discrimination. What would change if I joined your lawsuit?" "Everything," Patricia said without hesitation. "You have something that most discrimination victims don't have: detailed documentation of your customer history, legal representation that can't be intimidated, and financial resources to take this fight all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. Plus, your case is so clear-cut and egregious that it would be almost impossible for the bank to defend." Marcus felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he had been hoping for, a chance to use his privilege and resources to fight for justice not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged by this institution. "Dr. Williams, I'm in. What do you need from me?" Over the next week, Marcus's life became consumed with the legal battle against First National Bank. His team of investigators uncovered a disturbing pattern of discrimination that went far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. The bank's own internal documents, obtained through subpoenas, revealed training materials that encouraged employees to be extra cautious with high-risk demographics, and performance metrics that rewarded managers for minimizing services to unprofitable customer segments. The investigation revealed that First National Bank had systematically discriminated against Black, Hispanic, and Asian customers for years. They had denied loans to qualified minority applicants, charged higher fees to customers from certain zip codes, and provided inferior customer service to anyone who didn't fit their profile of a desirable client. The discrimination was so pervasive that it had become part of the bank's corporate culture. Marcus's case became the centerpiece of a federal class action lawsuit that eventually included over 300 plaintiffs. His financial resources allowed the legal team to hire expert witnesses, conduct extensive discovery, and resist the bank's attempts to delay and intimidate their way out of accountability. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with just filing lawsuits. He wanted to create consequences that would force real change in the banking industry. Working with his business partner and longtime friend, Sarah Chun, who ran a successful investment advisory firm, there was silence on the other end of the line for several seconds. "Marcus, please tell me you're joking." "I wish I were. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? We need to discuss our options. I'll be there in 30 minutes. And Marcus, don't do anything rash. I know you're angry, but we need to handle this the right way." Marcus ended the call and looked back at the bank one more time. Through the glass windows, he could see employees gathering to discuss what had just happened. Some were shaking their heads, while others seemed to be congratulating the security guards on a job well done. What none of them realized was that they had just humiliated and expelled one of their most valuable customers. More importantly, they had awakened something in Marcus that had been dormant for years, a burning desire to use his wealth and influence to fight back against the kind of institutional racism that still poisoned American society. As he walked away from the bank, Marcus's mind was already working on a plan. He had the resources to fight back in ways that most victims of discrimination could never imagine. And he intended to use every tool at his disposal to ensure that what happened to him today would never happen to anyone else. The branch manager and security guards thought they had won by forcing him to leave. They had no idea that they had just started a war with someone who had the money, the connections, and the determination to take them all down. Marcus Thompson was about to show them what real power looked like. Harrison stared at the check for several long seconds, then looked up at Marcus with an expression that seemed to suggest he thought this was some kind of elaborate joke or scam. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to need to verify the authenticity of this check before we can proceed with any deposit." "Of course," Marcus said. "That's standard procedure for large amounts. How long will that take?" "Well," Harrison said, his discomfort becoming more obvious by the minute. "Given the unusual circumstances, it could take several days, possibly weeks." Marcus had deposited large checks before, and verification had never taken more than a few hours. But he decided to give Harrison the benefit of the doubt. "Several days is fine. I assume you'll call me when it's ready to be deposited?" "Actually, Mr. Thompson, there's another issue," Harrison said, clearly struggling with how to phrase what came next. "Our bank has certain policies about large cash transactions. We need to be very careful about money laundering and other illegal activities." The implication hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. Harrison was essentially accusing him of criminal activity based on nothing more than the color of his skin and his casual appearance. This was the moment when Marcus's legendary patience finally reached its limit.